Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is expect. Let's look at a few definitions. The first way this verb expect is used is to mean to regard something as likely to happen. Another way the verb gets used is to mean to regard someone as likely to do something or to be something. A third meaning for this verb expect is to believe that someone or something will arrive soon. You might hear people say things like they are expecting a guest or expecting a visitor. A fourth meaning for this verb expect is to require someone to fulfill an obligation. So you might have a boss or a manager say that they expect you as an employee to do a particular activity. Expect is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, all we need to do is add ing to form expecting. The past tense and participle forms are made by adding ed to the end of the word. Because this verb ends in a T sound, the ed is going to make an id sound. Expected, expected. Next, let's look at a phrasal verb with expect. You might hear someone say that they expect something from somebody, or they expect something from something else. And the meaning for this is to think or believe that something will happen or that someone will do something. I've got two examples of this. The first sentence is, you shouldn't expect sympathy from them. So this is sort of a negative expectation. So you are thinking or believing that something will not happen in this case. This person is not going to be understanding or kind. The next example is that the behavior you expect from your children? So again, it's going back to that meaning of what you believe your children should do in this case. This week, our series of videos are going to focus on active versus passive voice. It is more common for you to see active voice when you're reading or hear active voice from your conversations with people in the community or people at work. But it's still important to understand kind of the subtle differences in how we communicate in these different ways. So a sentence that's an active voice is going to begin with the person or thing that is responsible for a particular action. I have two examples here. Mike cleaned the house. Jen planted vegetables. In the first sentence, I know that Mike is responsible for the action of cleaning. And in the second sentence, Jen is responsible for the action of planting. If we have a sentence in passive voice, though, it is going to begin with the person or the thing that receives the action or that is acted on. The person who did the action, who's responsible for the action, may not be included, or that person may come at the end of a sentence, and their name will come after the preposition by. So I'm going to take my first example in active voice, Mike cleaned the house, and we'll change that to passive voice. The house was cleaned. Or I could say, the house was cleaned by Mike. I can take the active voice example, Jen planted vegetables, and change it to passive voice. Vegetables were planted, or vegetables were planted by Jen. There are a few reasons that people might use passive voice, and it could be that we're using this particular style because we don't know the person or people that are responsible for the action. They're just unknown. Another reason people might use passive voice is that the person or people that are doing the action, they just aren't important. The writer or the speaker might be wanting to emphasize the object or person or thing that's receiving the action. So if they start the sentence with that, that's where your focus and your attention goes. Another reason people might choose to use passive voice is they are trying to avoid blame, or if it's kind of reflective back to them, they might be avoiding taking responsibility for something. So let me show you an example of that. In passive voice, I could say, mistakes were made. We don't know who made the mistakes, just that they were made. If instead I used active voice and I said, you made a mistake, or he made a mistake, she made a mistake, any of those things, that could sound very harsh, might be too direct. Depending on the relationship with a person, that could be kind of tense or difficult. So that might be another reason someone goes to the very general mistakes were made, and then if somebody else wants to say, yes, it was me, I made the mistake, that might be a better or more comfortable situation for people. So today we're going to take expect and compare active voice in the simple past tense and passive voice simple past tense, and just look at a few differences in how we construct those types of sentences. Let's start with affirmative sentences. We'll look at active voice, then passive. To make an active voice sentence in the simple past tense, we're going to use the past tense form of our verb, which today is expected. It's going to stay expected no matter what our subject is. Singular or plural, it will stay the same. So here's an example of that. Doctors expected an increase in COVID-19 cases after Memorial Day. If I want to change that sentence into passive voice, to do that, I'm going to use a past tense form of be. So this would be was or were. And then the participle form of the verb, which again is the same as the past tense for this particular verb. So here's the passive voice of that same sentence. COVID-19 cases were expected to increase after Memorial Day. And these sentences actually came from a newspaper article that was reporting on the large increase in cases that we're seeing in about 20 US states right now. Next, let's look at negative sentences, both in active and passive voice. In active voice, to make a negative sentence in the simple past tense, we're going to use did not and the base verb, or didn't and the base verb. It's very common with native speakers to speak faster, communicate more information more quickly, so you'll hear the contraction form quite often. Here's an example of that. Meteorologists didn't expect rain yesterday. So meteorologists are the scientists that study and report this information to us about weather, and maybe it's sort of just known. That's who's sharing that information. We want to focus on the result. So to do that in passive voice, again, I'm going to use a past tense form of be, then not, or you might hear the contractions, wasn't, weren't, and then the participle form of the verb. Rain wasn't expected yesterday. Next, let's look at making a question. In active voice, to do that, we'll follow the pattern of using did, then our subject, and then the base verb. Here's an example of that. Did you expect many speakers at the protest and rally? In the passive voice, we're going to use the past tense form of be. And then what comes next is who's receiving, what's receiving the action, who or what is receiving the action, and then the participle form of the verb. Were many speakers expected at the protest and rally? Finally, today let's take a look at some words that are related to our verb expect. We'll start with the noun form, expectation. This can have a couple different meanings. The first is a strong belief that something will happen or that something will be the case in the future. Here's an example of that meaning in a sentence. Customers now have different expectations for dining in a restaurant during a pandemic. So, our beliefs about what should happen or will happen are different now than they were 6 months ago. An expectation could also be a belief that someone will or should achieve something. Here's an example of that. The teacher has high expectations for all of her students. So this might be related to what sort of scores they might earn on tests or how they might perform on other projects and written work. Another word related to our verb expect is the adjective expected, and it means that something is very likely or anticipated. Here's an example of that in a sentence. What are your expected monthly expenses? So perhaps this is a question in a conversation about a budget, right? So we're asking, what expenses do you anticipate? Right? And so you might be able to say, well, I spend this much in rent and this much on utilities and this much with food, and you go category by category. The last thing I'm going to leave you with today is an idiom. To be expecting is another way to say someone is pregnant or carrying a child. Okay? Here it is in a sentence. She's expecting her first child in November. Sometimes you will hear this idiom used to connect to an entire couple. You might say they are expecting their first child. And that's true even though really just one person is doing all the work in regards to being pregnant. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you will try and use expect as you speak and as you write this week. Feel free to write sample sentences in the comments section, and I'll check them out and offer you some feedback. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.